Hi, it's me again, Brodie McLeod. Unfortunately, I massively misspent my youth and spent my time in college mostly just selling cannabis, getting high and drunk in the pubs and bars of Exeter city centre, and never really got any GCSEs or A levels, and I certainly didn't go to university. But I do know a little bit about PPE, like politics, philosophy, and economics, that I've just kind of garnered from the University of Life. I've just read an article, or I saw online, that the Japanese had just mobilised a load of troops. Now that might sound like a kind of insignificant news story, and if I was a PPE student, I'd be able to tell you exactly why that's such a monumental and like a really big deal. That's like a really very significant event to be taking place. Japanese military are pretty good, and they've got some pretty good technology to back them up. And if they're mobilising their troops to somewhere else to help them out, then that might be really good. Or it might be really bad, depending on how it all plays out. I've got an article here. The Rising Sun over Wiesbaden, Japan's NATO pivot and the re-engineering of global order. So this is by senior geopolitical correspondent, Germany. I don't know what, I wrote this using a prompt on AI, so I don't know what the fuck that's all about at all, really. In the quiet bureaucratic corridors of Wiesbaden, Germany, a historical threshold has been crossed with remarkably little fanfare. On May the 29th, 2026, Tokyo finalised the deployment of 4 Japanese self-defence forces to join the NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine command. To the casual observer, 4 individuals in uniform inside a sprawling Allied logistics hub might seem like a drop in the ocean of international security, yet the students of politics, philosophy and economics, and indeed for anyone seeking to understand the trajectory of our fragmenting world, this micro-intervention represents a macro-tectonic shift. It signals the definitive end of the post-Cold War region security architecture and the birth of a truly globalised chessboard. So first of all, the politics, the collapse of the security silo. For decades, the global stability of our planet was managed through neatly compartmentalised regional silos. The Euro-Atlantic area was the domain of NATO. The Asia-Pacific was anchored by a network of bilateral American alliances, colloquially known as the hub and spokes system. The geographical division of labour is now obsolete. By embedding personnel from the ground, air and maritime self-defence forces directly into a NATO command dedicated to European conflict, Japan has formalised a doctrine. It has a long whispered, the security of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific is indivisible. Politically, this represents a sophisticated counterintelligence against what Western intelligence marks as an emerging autocratic axis. As Russia, China, Iran and North Korea deepen their strategic alignments, trading munitions, satellite technology and economic lifelines, democratic states are responding with cross-theatre institutional synthesis. Japan is no longer merely observing European security from afar, it's functionally participating in its logistical management. This move fundamentally re-engineers NATO's structural identity. NSATU was built in July 2024 to institutionalise Western assistance to Ukraine, shifting the leadership from an ad hoc US-led coalition to a permanent NATO framework. Introducing Tokyo into this architecture transforms NATO from a localised Atlantic alliance into the operational clearinghouse for a global democratic security network. For political scientists, this is an elegant manifestation of structural realism, states pooling international institutional capacity to balance against multi-layer threats. So the next bit's about philosophy, pacifism, logistics, and the morality of proactive peace. For philosophers and constitutional scholars, Japan's deployment is a masterclass in conceptual evolution. Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, drafted in the shadow of World War II, explicitly states that the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation. How then does an ostensibly pacifist state legally and ethically justify sending officers to coordinate military hardware and training for an active war zone? The answer lies in the linguistic and philosophical gymnastics of non-combat intervention. The Japanese defense military was careful to emphasize that these 4 officers will serve purely as liaisons and logistics coordinators. Insulated entirely from active combat operations, this introduces a fascinating ethical paradox. Does the moral responsibility for state violence extend to those who manage the supply chains of that violence? Under traditional just war theory, a clear line is drawn between combatants and non-combatants. However, modern logistics complicates this clean dichotomy. If an officer coordinates the transit of an artillery system that's subsequently used by foreign forces in the European theatre, that officer's labour is necessary condition for the exercise of kinetic force. Tokyo reconciles this paradox through the philosophical framework of proactive contribution to peace. In this view, absolute passivity in the face of aggression is not moral clarity, it's systematic negligence. By framing logistical support for a sovereign state under attack as a defence of the rules-based international order, Japan is reframing pacifism. It's transforming from an isolationist negative peace, the simple absence of Japanese military action, to an engaged structural peace, the maintenance of global rules that prevent systemic collapse. And you've got the economics, the calculus of interdependent deterrence. From an economics perspective, Japan's integration into the NSATU is dictated by the cold calculus of supply chains and maritime macroeconomics. Japan is an island nation entirely reliant on open, stable global trade routes for its energy, food, and raw materials. The war in Ukraine disrupted global agriculture and energy markets, demonstrating that a shock in Eastern Europe reverberates instantly across Tokyo commodity exchanges. More critically, Tokyo's economic strategists view the defense of Ukraine as an existential insurance policy for the Indo-Pacific. If the international community allows the violent revision of borders in Europe, it sets a dangerous economic and geopolitical precedent for East Asia, especially regarding the Taiwan Strait, a maritime choke point through which nearly half of the global container fleet passes. A conflict in Taiwan would trigger a catastrophic decoupling of global technology supply chains, wiping trillions of dollars off global GDP. By assisting NATO in stabilising the European theatre, Japan is effectively purchasing deterrence in the Pacific. It is a calculated economic trade, spending marginal institutional capital in Wiesbaden today to prevent an economically ruinous trade freeze in South China Sea tomorrow. Furthermore, this move coincides with Japan's historic trajectory towards allocating 2% of its GDP to defence, a pivot that's fundamentally restructuring its domestic industrial base and opening up unprecedented opportunities for defence technology co-development with European partners. In conclusion, the layman's reality. So you strip away the grand theories of political science and the ethical debates of philosophy and the complex formulas of macroeconomics, and what remains for the ordinary citizen, people like you and me who don't have a PPE degree or maybe any kind of degree. The reality is that our world has grown too small for localised crises. A disruption in a European grain silo impacts grocery prices in Osaka or London. An unstable maritime border in Asia threatens the availability of microchips in Frankfurt or New York. The arrival of 4 Japanese officers in Germany is visual proof that security can no longer be outsourced or ignored based on geography. For the layman, this intervention means that the global stability that guarantees our daily economic, social, and political lives is increasingly dependent on an interconnected web of alliances. The rising sun over Wiesbaden is not a historical anomaly, it is a preview of our collective interdependent future.